At this point, I'll go ahead and render him so we know where we're at. We've applied our normal map to him. We've already UV laid out the creature. All of those steps are pretty important at this point because we can't change the layout once we start applying the texture. Getting a texture on him is a fairly simple process. It's really just a matter of drawing and matching up seams. But it can be pretty time intensive. And instead of making 3 or 4 videos of me just drawing in Photoshop, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the main points here, and then I'll cut the video and I'll come back to the next main point. So this one's going to be a little bit different than most of the videos in that it's not going to be in real time. So the first step we're going to do here, we're going to select our little critter. You can see he has a UV unwrap UVW on him. I'm going to go down under Edit, and I'm going to export his UV render, or his UV layout, using Tools, Render UVW Template. This little guy will come up. You just say Render UVW Template. There's his template. And I'm going to go ahead and save this. And we're going to call this Goat Texture Template. Say 01. And I'm going to save this as a just a Targa image. I tend to use Targas, but you can use any of the major formats for this. Different game engines require different needs. And I'm going to go ahead and save this. I don't need it as a 32-bit, but you can save it with the alpha. I'm just going to save it as 24-bit. I just draw over these grid lines. I don't use them as alphas. So that's done. And now I'm going to start the texturing process. The biggest problem we have isn't in drawing the texture map. That's really just a matter of drawing skill and a few tools in Photoshop. That's not a big deal. What we do have a problem with is the seams. And the more that pelt mapping and these organic seams have kind of come on the scene, the bigger the problem is with the seams. When the seams were nice straight lines, like in the old days, everything was a lot simpler. But now we have these curved edges. You can see them here all over our creature. And what I like to do is use a program called Body Paint. It actually ships with Cinema 4D, which is another 3D software. And realistically, I doubt most of you would have Body Paint. But I wanted to show you Body Paint just to show you how in production this is mostly done. And then in the next little segment here, you'll see it done over in Photoshop. So don't panic if you don't have Body Paint. But I'm going to go ahead and open it up. Oh, first what I've done here is I've exported the mesh. I've gone to File, Export. Actually, Export Selected, since that's selected one. And I've chosen OBJ as my file type, and I've exported my little goat here. He's called Goat Template OBJ, and I left all the default settings in the OBJ rollout. Now I'm going to hop over here to Body Paint, which is a different looking program. And remember, this is not part of Max. This is a separate program. I just want to show you how this works so you can get an idea of some simpler ways to texture your creature. I'm also using a Wacom tablet, and when we get into the texturing, you really want to get a Wacom tablet. It's a great way to kind of just draw on something. And I'm not going to cover this program at all in depth, but I want to show you what it can do. The first thing I'm going to do here is poke around. Here's my UV layout, and when I hit View, this is my model. And what I can do, using these different preset brushes, I'm going to choose one here I've been using. This is kind of like a, well, that's not the one I want. This one. I've made some preset brushes here already, and using the Active tool, I can come in here and now paint on my creature, and you can see the seams here that I'm painting over. There's a seam that runs right through here, and I'm just painting right over that seam. And now if I go back over to my texture map, you can see where it's painted right over the seam, and it's all automatic. Doing this in Photoshop, we can do. it's just a little bit more of a pain. What I want to do here is, let's see, pressure, I think is what we want. Yeah, I'm going to change the pressure setting on it so that I can draw a little bit softer. And I'm just going to kind of poke around my model, and I've got a couple buttons here on my keyboard I'm maneuvering around with so I can get him in a little bit better position. There we go. And I'll go back to painting on him. And I'm just going to tackle these seams here. So you can see I'm just kind of brushing over certain areas. And I'm just kind of laying in the color. Not really giving too much thought right now to where I want this color. We can always change it later. And this process will probably take about, an hour with this particular program in order to get the texture to look nice. But if we hop over to our texture, you'll see that it's filling in all these textures. Now, certain areas like this, I can go into Photoshop and I can just flip them over to the other side because everything's nice and equal. So really, as long as I get one side okay, I can just mirror everything over in Photoshop. And let's see. I have these there's different JPEGs in here that I can play with to try and get a little bit better color. But you get the idea. What I'm going to do now, here we go, is I'm going to cut the video and I'm going to go ahead and paint this texture onto my creature. As I was making this is about 20 minutes into the process here. As I was making this, I thought it might be useful to show you how I'm laying out the pattern of this creature. And all I'm doing is I'm using some generic materials here in Cinema Paint, 4D Paint, sorry. And I'm just using different colors and changing the size of my brush. And now I'm going to kind of lay in some, make sure I've got the right thing there. I'm going to lay in some spots here, or some stripes on my creature. And you can see that with this software, I can pretty much just draw right on the model. Now, I don't like to spend a lot of time in Cinema Paint. I like to get over to Photoshop as quickly as possible. But for this particular creature, I'm going to give him some stripes there. We'll give him another one coming down his shoulder here. And you can see how it's just painting right over those seams. But I can blend these just like I can in Photoshop, and that's what makes this little program so neat. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of blend over these using a softer brush, and what that's going to do is just soften that seam so that I don't have to do it over in Photoshop. And the pattern will still be there, but there we go. Most of the hard work will already have been done, and you can see I've only done one side of him. The other side is all gray, but he's looking pretty good. We'll put some stripes here on his rump. Kind of thinking he's kind of like a zebra. Remember which one I was using. There we go. Bump the scale down a little bit. And we'll just put some there that kind of go around him. I'm going to put a few here on his leg. There we go. We'll put a few that kind of stripe along his leg here. There we go. I think that's that's going to look pretty good, and then we'll just fade those in. Give him his new little stripes here. I've layered a lot of different materials on here to get this kind of organic look that I've got here. There we go. See if I like that front part I just put in. I think that's a little harsh. We'll just paint over these areas here. Alright, and I need my dark color again. I'll just kind of soften some of these areas. Fill in a few more. Well, you get the idea. It's really a nice tool. I really like this software, but we're going to now cut away from it since this isn't a class on deep paint. And now the next time that you see this guy, here's his texture, by the way, being covered up. You can see those stripes I just drew in right there. The next one you see here will be over in Photoshop. Here's what I've got so far. It looks kind of like a mess, but this is the texture. I'm going to now hop over here to Photoshop, and we're going to need to open up the template that we originally made, the base texture we created over in 4D Paint. Remember, if you don't have that, you can still just continue on from this point and make your texture over in Photoshop. Here we are. And then we're going to have to do some flipping and flopping and getting things lined up here. But here we go. Okay, I'm going to go over here and open some of the pieces that I'm going to need. And let's see. I think we need this one, this one, this one. And we need the template and the texture. You'll also need the normal map eventually, but that'll be in the next video. Okay, so we already exported this piece out from Max a while back at the beginning of the video. You could just paint into these areas, and your seams will be a bit of a problem. You'll have to match those up carefully by making changes in Photoshop and then hopping back over to Max to see if the changes worked. But for the time being, we're going to go ahead and just line these two up. So I'm going to drag this piece over, and we'll get it lined up. I'm going to turn on snaps here so that it's exact. And we'll go to our overlay. Actually, I've skipped a step. I'm going to put this back to normal. What I want to do first is invert this. And if I go to Adjustments, Invert, that'll make this top layer white with black lines. The pink I never like, and so what I'm going to do is desaturate this to get rid of the pink. There's some pink edges left over in Max. And then I'm going to bump this over to either Overlay or Multiply, whichever works better. In my case, Multiply is going to work better. And there it is. So you can see now I can see down through the layers. And I'm going to hop down to this bottom layer now. I'm all done with this template at this point. So I'm working down in the color layer. And what I'm going to do now is come in here in Photoshop and just clone in some of these areas and continue these patterns up to the edge, because I don't have an exact fit yet, but I only need to do one side. As long as my my original UV layout is pretty equal on both sides, we can just use each side separate. The seams don't have to be exact. They're not going to be during this process. There we go. Okay, and it looks like in this case what I'm going to do is just split this right down the middle here and go around. I'll copy that, paste it. Oops. Do that. Paste it, and jump over here to transform, and I'm going to flip it horizontally, and then I'm just going to lay this piece over here on the other side so that we have a fairly well matched up seam there. And it's not going to be exact, it doesn't have to. I'm going to go ahead and merge that down and then go back to cloning. And I'm going to do this throughout the whole piece. I'm just cloning right now, holding down Alt to make a selection, and then just kind of cloning that back into it there. There we go. You can make other changes along the way, so subtle color changes you can do in here. It does not have to be exact on both sides. There we go. So that piece is done. And I'm going to do that throughout this whole piece. And I'm going to be flipping one side over to the other side, and then I'll come back and start the video again. I've spent about, I guess it was about an hour flipping and cloning different areas of this, and this is what I have left. If I zoom in, you'll notice I put a little bit of a grain on top of this, and I've added some kind of fur parts here just to make the texture look a little bit more interesting. The grain will help tighten up the texture and will simulate fur a little bit, at least for the time being. Okay, I'm going to save this. It's saved as GoTexture 03, and we'll hop back over to Max. Now we're going to put the texture in the slot that has our normal map. So once again, here's our goat with the normal map, but no diffuse texture. And if I let that render through, there we go. So now we're going to put the diffuse texture on there. It's not going to line up exactly because we haven't matched our diffuse texture with our normal map. We don't have an ambient occlusion map, which will help it match up a little bit better. And we haven't addressed the seams. So I don't even know what this will look like yet. I haven't looked at it. So I'm going to go to my diffuse color, and we're going to select bitmap. There we go. And I'm going to go get my bitmap that I just made. There we go. And we're going to plop that on there. And now we'll take a look at what our goat looks like. Let's look at him from the side here first. So here's our goat with his texture. You can see some of the seams don't line up very good right now. Some of them are way off, like right in here and right over here. Let's see what this area here looks like. But he's looking better. Alright, so I've got some seam issues. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fix up those seams over in Photoshop. So I just need to clone over certain areas, and then I'm going to flip-flop back and forth between Photoshop and Max and kind of match up all my seams. So that's going to be the next segment when we come back, and we'll see what this guy looks like once we fix all the seams. I fixed up most of the seams, at least all of them you can see. I didn't pay much attention to his underside. And I've changed the texture around a little bit to fit what I want. You can tell it looks a little bit different than the last time you saw it, but for the most part all the main elements are still there. Now it took a long time to seam this up in Photoshop. I just worked about 2 hours on getting the seams to work, and that's pretty normal. There's a lot of seams there. And I went from Photoshop and just touched up a little piece and then hopped over to Max, see if the seam worked, if it matched up with its other elements. And then I just kept going back and forth. Now keep in mind the seams weren't perfect. What I did after I got it close was I rendered an ambient occlusion map to go with my normal map and my diffuse map, so that that would even cover up the seams even more. So areas like here in his little groin area here, you can't tell if the seam matches up or not. This scene you're looking at here is only lit with one target direct light. It's not lit with anything else. So as far as the texture map, it looks a little bit different than what you might think. Here's the final texture map. Now this one was rendered to texture in Max, and the diffuse map is all the stripes and the fur and the coloring of the animal. And all the shadowing, so some areas darker than others, was done with my lighting map or my ambient occlusion map. Now we've had a tutorial on that earlier that you may have to go back and review to get that right. But for the most part, all I did, I'm going to minimize this, is I clicked on my creature, so I highlighted him, and I hit 0 on the keyboard. That brings up this render to texture. I saved it where I knew where it was going. Here's my goat creature. Make sure we used existing channel. That used our UV layout. And then I had to make sure the size is correct, and you set that down here. And in my case, I rendered the shadows and everything else in the scene, all the light in the scene. Now there's a skylight in the scene that also had to be set up correctly in order to get the ambient occlusion map. So again, you're probably going to need to go back to the ambient occlusion map video to get this step right. Then when I hit render, it rendered out this map. And this is my diffuse map with my lighting map burned into it. I then saved it as a bitmap. And actually here, if you're going by my settings, I only have the lighting map. You could also have the diffuse map. I had deleted it. Here's the diffuse map, and here's the lighting map. So diffuse map, lighting map, both of them come in the wrong size. So we change the size. Then we go down here and we hit render. And that will get us everything that we need. So this rendered to texture right here is my diffuse map and my lighting map burned together. You can also see it trims off all that excess messy looking stuff, which you can or don't have to do, one or the other. But this is what I ended up with. And when I put it on my creature, you can see that that same map is here on the creature. No other lighting is needed in the scene at this point. And in our game environment, normal lighting won't affect him too much. We haven't burned in so many lights that he's going to really matter. It's just his underside is going to be a little darker than his top side. That also helps hide some of our seams. Now, over in Photoshop, I've taken this same texture. Here's what it looked like when it came out of Max. That's the one that's on my creature now in Max. I've applied a solid color because I wanted him to be a little bit more bronze colored. And you can see here in my layer, this is an overlay channel with a fill of 27%. And that gives him a little bit more of a healthy glow. I wasn't happy with that pale coloring that he had on him. He was kind of jaundiced colored for me. And now I've also taken my normal map, which we made a lot earlier, and I've applied it over the top in an overlay channel. And in this case, it's a multiply channel for my normal map, and it's at 100% fill. And all I'm going to do now, one last step, is I'm going to go into my diffuse map, and using my brush, I'm just going to add some areas where the normal map is causing bump that's not in my diffuse map. That's a little confusing. Let me turn all these off and you'll see what I mean. These dots that I just drew here in the diffuse map are only showing up as nostrils in the normal map. They're actually right there. And I want to accentuate some of these areas that the normal map is dealing with, like up here around the eyes. I'm going to make a new layer here. I have these little bumps that are only on the normal map, and what I want to do, I'm going to find a good color here. I'm just going to dot in these areas, and it's hard to tell what I'm doing because I'm working under a lot of layers here. So these areas, I'm just going to accentuate them a little bit so when they end up getting burned into the diffuse map, they match my normal map. There we go. And you can see if I turn off the normal map, those dots now match up with the normal map. See them there? And I'm going to put this on a multiply channel, or let's see what other ones we've got. I don't really like the multiply channel. I think overlay probably works a little bit better. I'm going to drop the fill down a little bit, and there we go. I'm going to look around for anything else that's only in my normal map. I think that's about it. The wrinkles and all don't really matter. Yeah, okay. So you can use your normal map as kind of a template that way. I'm going to turn everything off here, the normal map. Everything else is burned into my map. I'm going to flatten this. Actually, I'll save this as a Photoshop file so you can look at it, I guess. And this is going to be called my Final Go PSD. We'll save that as a Photoshop file. We'll collapse it all down, and I'll save over my Final Go Targa. There he is. I'm going to save this as Final Go 2 so you can see the difference, I guess. Okay, and now we'll go back over to Max. We'll render this guy real quick. Here's our goat. And I want to, this direct light is too bright that I've got in here. I'm going to dull it down a little bit. There we go. So we can see him a little bit better. And now we'll go over here. We'll change our map to Final Go 2. There he is. We'll render that, and you can see he's a little bit healthier bronze color. He's got his little orange dots here that match up with everything. His nostril is nice and black. And I think we're finally going to call him done. This has been a long road with this little creature. So the texture mapping process is not difficult. I know there's a lot of steps there bouncing around, but there's nothing too technical about it. It's just getting the map to fit. You're going to probably need to go back to some of the other videos and get some of the pieces. I didn't want to spend time redoing stuff we've already done. But there he is, and give it a shot, see what you can come up